Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to dig into one of the most, well, honestly, one of the most disturbing psychological experiments of all time. It's a study that posed a really simple but terrifying question. How far would you go if an authority figure told you to hurt someone?
Okay, so just imagine this for a second. The year is 1961. You see an ad in the paper for a memory study at a big university. You think, hey, why not? I can make a few bucks and help out science. So you sign up. But what you have no idea about is that you're walking into a situation, a choice, that's going to stick with you probably for the rest of your life.
So you show up, right? And it's this really impressive lab at Yale University. Everything looks super professional. A guy in a gray lab coat comes out to meet you. He's got that serious academic vibe. And there's another volunteer there too, a really friendly, kind of quiet guy named Mr. Wallace. The whole thing just feels legitimate, important, you know?
So the guy in the lab coat explains the deal. We're studying how punishment affects learning. Simple enough. He holds up 2 slips of paper. You draw one, and yours says teacher. Mr. Wallace gets the other one, learner. Seems totally random, right? Well, it wasn't. The draw was rigged. You were always going to be the teacher.
And then things start getting strange. They lay out the procedure, all very methodical. You watch as they take Mr. Wallace into another room and literally strap him into a chair, attaching electrodes to his wrists. Then they sit you down in front of this machine. It's a shock generator. It has 30 switches in a row, from 15 volts, labeled slight shock, all the way up to a terrifying 450 volts marked with just XXX. The instructions are crystal clear. Every time he gets an answer wrong, you press a switch. And each time, you go one level higher.
Okay, so the test begins. At first, it's fine, but then he starts making mistakes. At 75 volts, you hear a little grunt from the other room. At 120 volts, it's a clear shout of pain. And then, at 150 volts, you hear Mr. Wallace yelling through the wall, "Experimenter, that's all. Get me out of here, please. My heart's starting to bother me." Suddenly, this doesn't feel like some abstract experiment anymore. It feels very, very real.
So naturally, you hesitate. You turn to the scientist and you're like, whoa, I don't know about this. But he just looks at you, completely calm, and says something like, the experiment requires that you continue. He's not yelling, he's not threatening you, he's just stating a fact, as if the science is more important than the man screaming next door.
And it gets worse. The protests turn into agonized screams. He's shouting about his heart condition again. And then, after the 330-volt shock, there's just silence. Dead silence. He's not answering the questions anymore. You think, okay, this has to be over now, right? But the experimenter just tells you to treat the silence as a wrong answer and says you must continue. And here it is, the result that absolutely shocked the world. A full 65%. That's nearly 2/3 of the participants, just regular people from all walks of life. They went all the way to the final 450-volt switch. They delivered the maximum shock to a man who had gone completely silent. It's just chilling.
Now, don't get the wrong idea. These people weren't monsters. They weren't enjoying this. Stanley Milgram himself wrote about watching grown men, poised businessmen, get reduced to twitching, stuttering wrecks. They were sweating, they were trembling, they were begging to stop. They were clearly in extreme distress. And yet, when the authority figure told them to go on, most of them did. Now, here's the big reveal. It was all a setup. Well, sort of. Mr. Wallace, he was an actor. The shock generator? It didn't do a thing. The screams were all pre-recorded. But the participants' reactions, their stress, their anguish, that was 100% real. And when the world found out, it created an absolute firestorm about ethics and research that, honestly, is still going on today.
I mean, just think about the ethical nightmare here. First, there's the huge deception. These people had no idea what they were really getting into. Then there's the psychological harm. We're talking extreme stress. But maybe the worst part is something called inflicted insight. It's that awful realization that, hey, under the right conditions, I'm capable of doing something truly terrible to another person. How do you even live with that?
But, okay, here's a twist that I bet you didn't see coming. A year later, they surveyed the participants. And get this, an overwhelming 84% said they were actually glad or very glad to have been a part of it. Yeah, glad. Many felt like it taught them something really important about themselves and about authority. Now, does that make the deception okay? That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
But Milgram wasn't done, not by a long shot. It wasn't enough that people obey. He wanted to know why. What are the little dials you can turn that make someone more or less likely to follow a terrible order? So we started running all these different variations, trying to find those hidden levers of obedience.
And what he found was fascinating. Turns out context is everything. Remember how the original experiment was at prestigious Yale? 65% obedience. But when he moved it to some rundown office building, that number dropped to under 48%. And get this, when the guy in the lab coat was swapped out for just a regular person giving the orders, obedience totally cratered. It fell to just 20%. It shows you just how powerful those symbols of authority, the fancy university, the lab coat, really are.
So for decades, the lesson for Milgram seemed pretty straightforward. People are just sheep. They'll blindly follow anyone in charge. But that might not be the whole story. More recently, psychologists have gone back and looked at all the original notes and recordings, and they've come up with a different theory. And in a way, it's even more disturbing.
This new idea is called engaged followership, and it argues that people weren't just mindlessly following orders. No, it's worse. It suggests they were active participants. They bought into the mission. They genuinely believed they were doing something important for science, and that noble cause made them willing to do the dirty work. They weren't just obeying, they were collaborating.
And here's the killer piece of evidence for this. Remember those prods from the experimenter? The experiment requires you to continue? They were all appeals to the scientific goal. But in the few instances where he dropped that pretense and just gave a blunt command, you have no other choice, you must go on. Guess what happened? Every single participant refused. The moment it stopped being a scientific collaboration and became a naked order, people pushed back. They weren't mindless automations.
So after all these years, why does this experiment still get under our skin? Why are we still talking about it? Because it holds up this really uncomfortable mirror. It suggests that terrible acts aren't just committed by evil people. They can be committed by ordinary people who truly believe they're serving some kind of greater good.
And that's really the core of it. The Milgram experiment pushes us past that simple question of would you obey to a much deeper one. It suggests evil isn't just about following orders, it's about what we're willing to do for a cause we believe in. So the final question isn't just would you push the button, it's what cause would make you feel like you should? And that is a much scarier question.